So I think as a queer community, especially because many of us have been hurt, we have to practice radical acceptance with each other. I hope that someday we will be really the change makers in society to prove that radical acceptance is something that can bring everyone towards collective liberation.
Just a little sound. Hi.
My name is Diego González-Medina. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a technologist and I'm the founding executive director of Liminal Works. And we're a nonprofit that builds products and platforms in service of collective liberation. I identify as a technologist, although most of my background is in analytics and data science. I've also been sort of like the chief WTF officer in many roles. It's like I do a lot of things. My last role, I was a director of analytics, product, and platforms, which tend to be very separate. So for analytics, it's really about being able to make good decisions quickly. You can think of it about going like a little bit shallow, but very wide. So if you're trying to make decisions, you want to have an idea of the landscape and some depth of knowledge across many areas of a business or maybe many areas of the world in order to make a decision that would impact the direction you go in as an organization or as a business or even as a person. We use data in a lot of personal decisions as well. And then data science is what then is able to go very deep on one of those things, and statistics will take you all the way down. But analytics, I really help organizations and leaders make informed decisions using data.
And you mentioned that you're doing this work for collective liberation. Can you kind of explain how those things tie in and like what your goals are with that?
Yeah, so some of my work has been to really sit with and walk with different customer bases, and that's more the product side of my work. You want to be really obsessed with their problems to figure out how to solve them. I myself am an organizer and activist. And so in community conversations about what we need to amplify our work, technology platforms come up a lot. And a lot of us are really feel a little bit hopeless sometimes that we'll have a platform that will actually serve our needs without selling our data, without putting our identity at risk. You know, something that's really focused on us without censoring a lot of us. A lot of LGBTQ people get censored more than others on social media. Specifically, you know, one of the things I thought about, or we talked about, was building a platform to share effective strategies. So how do we create more knowledge sharing between different communities that are working towards collective liberation? You can think of it almost like Wikipedia. So instead of the unit of knowledge being an article, it might be a strategy. And instead of it being like a public site, it's a private site. So it's really only for activists and organizers. And so this way, if something works in Los Angeles for trans rights, the next week or the next month, people can be replicating it across the US. If there's an anti-trans bill in Utah, as there was a few months ago, they were able to flood that site with false reports that were all credible enough that they couldn't filter them out, so it became unenforceable. Those are the type of tactics that we want to be sharing all around the US, either as a defensive mechanism, like if 2025 looks different than many of us would like it to look, we can also use this as a proactive strategies. And then, of course, there's restorative work that's important in communities. For example, finding joy and healing through celebrations such as Ballroom, right? So for Ballroom, I created a Ballroom website for our House of Luna. This was way back in 2017. It was number 2 and number 3 ranked site for Ballroom on Google. And now there's many more resources out there, but just by putting information out there about how we built what we built, we were getting 4,000 to 5,000 visitors from all around the world learning about Ballroom. So having those type of resources available can help our movement, whether that's an LGBTQ movement or other movements that are working towards collective liberation. And we're starting specifically in LGBTQ rights and gender justice and making it work for them. I first came out as bi when I was probably 14. I later identified just as gay when I really discovered myself in my early 20s or late teens. And now, because of the experience of who I've loved, I identify as pansexual. I feel like my soul would live could live in any gender and flourish. So when I introduce myself, I usually say I'm Diego, I'm poly, pan, and pause. Polyamory helped me really break down a lot of barriers to loving with my full capacity. And so having the ability to love people fully in my life, that's whether they're my romantic partner or not, has influenced me greatly. I have many intimate friendships that are emotionally intimate. It's not all about physical intimacy, but that polyamory gives me the language to navigate all the different ways that I love in my life. And then lastly, pause is I am HIV positive, and I think it's very important to share that there are people who are successful or still living, right, that are HIV positive. And then I am also sex positive. And so what's really important for me to say about that positivity is my sex positivity, as I believe it should be, is inclusive of asexuality. And so it's not a permission to do whatever you want with whoever you want. It's about building a construct where you build consent among adults to explore sexuality, and that there's no judgment within those confines. I grew up a little bit all over. I was born in Bellingham, Washington, lived there for 2 weeks, moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, stayed in the Southwest for like another 3 years, and then moved up to Kitsap County, which is right by Seattle, Washington. And I more or less stayed in the Pacific Northwest all the way through college, with a few exceptions. So I moved to Moscow when I was 6 years old, lived there for a year. My parents are in medicine. One's a physician, one's a nurse practitioner. And they got invited to open up, right after the fall of the USSR, open a clinic in Moscow, Russia. That was the first sort of Western style medicine. It was wildly unsuccessful. However, it gave me the experience of walking with and living around people that were in such a different economic, social stratosphere than Americans. They were going through hyperinflation that led to a huge boom in homelessness, and prices were doubling, I believe, between every 3 weeks to 3 months. So being in Russia during that time influenced my worldview, not just from an international lens, but also in terms of understanding how class is affected through economic factors. And that led me, I can probably talk later about this, but it led me into sort of the career I'm in now. I moved myself away from my family when I was 16 to Stockholm, Sweden. And Stockholm was because I was frankly very unsafe where I was at. And I think this is an experience a lot of queer youth have. I searched high and low for ways to leave home and to leave that place, and eventually found a program that was backed by a scholarship that I applied for without my parents' knowledge, but was accepted to. And so it took me about a year of convincing. So I first tried to leave when I was 15, deferred, and then I went to international boarding school in Sweden for 2 years. And then after that, I moved myself several times to Mexico City, first to just become fluent in Spanish. I went there for 3 months between gigs, had an amazing time, learned Spanish, and started to build community. And then my work in global health brought me back twice. And so I kept revisiting my friends there, and then my friend network grew. And they got to see the two sides of me, my corporate side, and then my Diego, real Diego side, Latino Diego side. And one of my best friends, he told me when I was I thought I was considering leaving the corporate world. He said, you're going to split right down the middle because you're acting like two very different lifestyles, two very different people. And it was after that point, I did leave that group, but it was after that point I really started making a concerted effort to walk in my authenticity, with my authentic energy in my profession. My first community was my house. And so I grew up with a Chicana mother and a Puerto Rican father. A lot of times after dinner when I was very young, we would put on music and dance together. And my broader community was just so very different than that. Once we were in the Pacific Northwest, there were no other Latino families. I would host a lot of different friends over at our place, but very rarely would we as a family get invited somewhere else. So that's why I started to feel kind of like, okay, our culture doesn't fit, or my culture doesn't fit. There's some othering. When I was 14, I started finding community in other people who were, just say, eccentric in different ways. So I would escape in the middle of the night to go to like a rave in the city when I was like 14. And yeah, so that was a way to taste freedom and something that was different. I also found an escape through theater. And so I joined the theater program. And that's why I started to really meet people that were queer and start to feel what it's like to be surrounded by other queer people. But the only person I could personally really in my community look up to as a queer person was probably my aunt, who was a healer and continues to be a healer. And I saw her come out as, I think she was in her mid-30s. And I saw what she had to go through to become truly accepted in the family after coming out. That did give me sort of like a model for when I did come out. I presented it with the partner that I had and being, this is a person that I love, which I had the benefit of being able to do. My parents used to always tell me this story about me as a kid, and I don't know why they kept repeating it, but it was that I used to refuse to leave the house unless I could walk out in a dress. And I'd get into these like random tantrums. I'd go into my mom's closet, put on a dress, and refuse to go to church or do anything unless I could wear it out. I think it was just because of the gender expectations that were being put on me that I just didn't care about. I still identify as a man, right? But I don't care. If I could put it that way, I just don't care. Being attracted to more than one sex is just something that I think is incredibly natural. So I never really had a moment where I felt like, oh, this is different, until I started verbalizing being attracted to guys. And that didn't happen until I was really in theater. So probably 14, 15. But I wasn't able to build my first like real deep relationship until college. It took that long. One thing that's really helped me show up with authenticity has been building a persona, no more than a persona, but building up an identity within the ballroom scene. And so in the ballroom scene, I'm known as Papi Luna. I'm the founder of the House of Luna. We built the Kiki scene for the Seattle area, and we're one of the founding houses for the Pacific Northwest. My mentor in this work is Stefan Wallace. He passed away, unfortunately, last year. He was also a leader, not just in ballroom, but in vaccine trial network and epidemiology. And so he's also a good example of like how his work in ballroom was able to impact science and vice versa. And he really brought a lot of sort of HIV awareness into the ballroom scene. And he was a model for me in my adulthood about these things. So very much in that platform, the idea that ballroom is a platform for collective liberation, we built a scene that centered and celebrated every identity. So I think still to this day, our ball had the most categories of any ball in the Pacific Northwest. At our events, we would have like 26 categories. And especially like at our first event, it was 26 categories. And we didn't care whether only one or two people were walking in that, because there's this special sauce, there's this special energy when you have, for example, in Face, just butch women walking against each other. You get that butch woman vibe, that butch woman energy that makes them who they are and so special. There's something cool about doing realness just for trans men, right? And then when you do voguing to have female figure, or like women's vogue, have that be its own thing. So there's a few different models about, how you should include all genders in ballroom. Ours is that you should provide a space for every type of gender expression, as well as one where any gender could be expressed. So yeah, I was a leader in ballroom in Seattle for 2 years. The co-founder, Jade, she moved to New York. I moved to Mexico City. And then talking with the kids, they decided they wanted to start their own houses. So the houseofluna.org is still up there as a website, but it exists only in name. And now I have kids and grandkids within the scene. I also walked in LA, Vancouver, Mexico City. I studied also in Berlin. In Mexico City is where I really started to build my identity as a performer, not just as an organizer. And so I'm known for body, for sex iron, and for realness. And what I love doing is storytelling. When you first get your tens in ballroom, which if you've never walked, it's like, it's an important life lessons. You show up with everything, or you better go packing home, like go home packing. So like, if you're showing up, like you give everything. And if you think that you can't give everything, walk. And when they chop you, you'll want to come back with everything the next time. So I always encourage people, don't wait until you're perfect, just do it and then do better the next time. Again, like that growth mindset. And so yeah, like Latin America, walking in Latin America taught me a lot. I think that it really helped me find the really radical activism in Ballroom that like specifically exists there. And it also helped me learn that like one cultural platform may not translate perfectly to another cultural context. And so we saw a lot of changes in Ballroom in Mexico City that wouldn't need to or shouldn't exist here. And there's many aspects of Ballroom here that wouldn't need to or shouldn't exist there. And so in Ballroom, we try to create categories that match the need of the community. So in Seattle, we're the first people to build non-binary categories. In Mexico, for example, they decided that they want to cut categories, that it felt oppressive to have those categories in their culture. And so that also relates to product and everything I expressed there. Having Ballroom has made me feel more full and powerful as a person. That's impacted the way that I show up in my workspaces and given me a sense of confidence and power that I didn't have before. As I shared before, I'm HIV positive. If it wasn't for Ballroom, I wouldn't be able to share that in my professional context with so much confidence because I have such a strong community behind me. And I can build such a strong community for other HIV positive people. My sort of mentor in Ballroom and really in life, he always says this, he'd always tell me this. And it wasn't really until he was gone when I needed to hear it that I realized how important it was. But for folks who are questioning whether they should go into tech or STEAM, who start to go into it, you may feel a little bit hopeless. You may feel confronted. You may feel inferior at times. That feeling of hopelessness is central to the experience of being at the frontier. And if that's a frontier of your own abilities or your past self going into your future self, that's expected. So vibe with it, move past it. As my mentor would always say, like, you are enough, you are worthy, you deserve all the things that you have, and you are loved. And so to never forget that. And all you need to do is, even if you just reach out to me, I'll tell you those same things and confirm those in you. And you'll find that if you reach out to others really in need and express what you're going through, you're going to find a lot more support than you thought you had. I was always good at math and I loved physics. I thought it was almost like the philosophy of matter. When I went to college, though, I was really curious in sort of the systems behind business. And so I decided, I'm going to try out business. And I like aced accounting. And so they tried to make me become an accountant. But going back to this experience in Moscow, we, in this econ class, were talking about economic policies in Moscow that led to that hyperinflation. I had no idea that what I was seeing at that time was hyperinflation, that what I saw were economic decisions being made in the context of this economic system. And then that's why I become like obsessed with economics, because I always cared about the well-being of the human race as a global citizen. But it finally gave me a place to put my effort into where I could research and understand systems that could potentially impact them for the better. And so I went hard and deep. I published 2 papers in economics that were peer-reviewed before I graduated, and then went straight into the world of research epidemiology, which sounds unrelated, but it is, because you all use the same statistical instruments, even the same software when it comes to statistical software. It was really through economics that I began to find like stats, which led me to the career I'm in now. Data gives you a way to understand the world, and it brought me closer to that. My path is somewhat traditional. I think what going to boarding school in Europe and Sweden helped me with is understanding that only you can be responsible for your grades. Only you can be responsible for your academic success. After university, I haven't gotten a single other degree. I got 1 certificate at Stanford, but anybody can apply to that. And what's very unique is to have gone as deep into research as I did without a master's or PhD. By working with a startup that was like a global health startup called Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, I was one of the first 60 staff Now they're over 500. They're this huge research enterprise. They brought me in despite not having a master's because they were just getting off the ground. But by being able to prove that I can do the work, because I am this like WTF officer, I'm a wild card. I can do a lot more than people think that I can do. I was able to move my way up within that institute. And so, yeah, I left with my name on 13 publications and like a few World Bank reports. And then all the other learning that I've done from there has just been on my own or through certificate programs, teaching myself different coding, teaching myself different, like how to build a website.
Do you have maybe one piece of advice for somebody who wants to do this work but doesn't want to, or maybe doesn't have access to like higher education in terms of a master's, PhD? Like what's maybe one piece of advice that you would give them to get there? Yeah,
universities are just learning communities. This day and age, all the knowledge is for free online. You can find almost all of it. So if you can find, whether it's like a tech meetup, let's say that you want to go into product, there's all these open product meetups. If it's, if you want to be like a front-end developer, they have meetups all the time. And then you can find people who are also aligned on values within there. So some people may be interested in like tech for good. San Francisco has all these tech for good meetups. And I believe they have chapters all around the US. I believe in Atlanta, Seattle as well. Build a learning community. And even if just like the one other friend you have that wants to learn to code, there's so many people that need technology. You'd be surprised that once you have enough skills, you can find somebody to build something for and start there and just keep going. I throttle how out I am about being poly, pan, and pause, depending on the team and environment I'm in. The last workplace I was in, I felt finally safe enough to say, pansexual and I'm polyamorous. I gave him the whole piece. And the reaction was like, oh, can you help explain? And so like I'm always there to explain to people. I think important context here is that as a community organizer, the spaces that I enter and that I build are in the cultural movement called Ballroom and house culture. And the purpose of Ballroom and house culture is to create a space where every queer identity, every queer form of art and expression feels centered and celebrated. Some spaces will center and celebrate more based on excellence than others, but ultimately we want people to feel validated in the process. And by creating a safe space or a healing space, you can get some of the most beautiful ideas out into the world. And so in technology and in engineering, what we build is like only as good as the audience, how inclusive we were and which audiences we want to be, we want it to serve. And so the thing about intersectionality is that if you find people who are extremely marginalized but could benefit from it, you figure out what are the obstacles and barriers for them to be able to access it. And people who have less intersections between where they are and this world where there's no barriers, if you solve for this person, you'll solve for everybody else along the way. And it takes a lot more work, but you get much better outcomes. A lot of times there's people that want to just do things quick and dirty to get it out there. That's one way to do it. The other thing you can do is you can make something work extremely well for just a few people, and then you aren't going to rely on marketing to bring it to the rest. And so through word of mouth and by making it excellent for somebody, and then everybody else who hears about that has ability to participate in that product or whatever you've built, then you're going to get this sort of organic momentum for whatever you're building. And so through my queer work and my queer community in Ballroom, it's really enabled me to build better things and design better things. I read a lot of news. I love following current events. Also like culturally to be plugged in. I was living in Mexico City for 6-7 years, and coming back to the States has been a bit of a culture shock. I knew how bad things were from the news, but again, being back, it's a whole different thing. And a lot of other activists and organizers and just the general public are feeling kind of hopeless. And so looking at the systems that we have, one of the questions I've been asking is what can we build to amplify effective work in activism and organizing? And the problem is that we know this from Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, that oppression and extractive actors in the world are using technology and at like the bleeding edge of it to make themselves more profit and to further their ends and their means and what they want to see in the world. Whereas people who want more collective liberation, we continue to use a lot of really great tools, grassroots community building, zines, conferences, in-person stuff matters a lot. But when it comes to getting the best ideas from those spheres and spreading that to the rest of the movement, we need a platform to be able to communicate that between our peers of activists and organizers. And so our obsession as Liminal Works is to build products and platforms that empower grassroots organizers and activists to deliver collective liberation to humanity. And our first product is S6-E, which many trans activists will know Cecilia Gentili. So it's a nod to her. She was radical in her inclusion of various populations, including sex workers, in solving their problems, getting them into politics, getting them to speak at the podium for different things. And so what S6-E does is exactly what I just talked about, like sharing effective strategies, but specifically for the LGBTQ rights and gender justice movement. And so we want this first and foremost to center, trans people and their rights and the most marginalized among them. So we want to really be able to defend against the attacks from the right on trans rights, especially in places like Utah and many other states. And then we want to also use this to be able to spread proactive and restorative movements such as Ballroom, so that more people can feel like they have the instruments and the information they need to be able to pick up the baton and use what's been working for one movement, bring that to another area of the country. The context of America is so interesting to me. I feel like, can we presume that everybody has a cell phone? Can we presume that everyone has access to the internet? I'm not certain, right? So when you say access to technology, I don't know whether we're talking about access to basic tech, because that certainly would be an issue for people experiencing that, especially in a country where places only accept credit cards and not cash. We're starting to see the impacts of the digital divide or not participating in formal systems being greater and greater. We need to build technologies that are safer to use because of LGBTQ. They need to feel safe. They are more attacked and less protected on a lot of the sort of FANG networks or big tech networks. So we need to start building other solutions. And I wish I could tell you that Mastodon is that thing, but I'm not certain if Mastodon is that thing. But that's just purely out of ignorance, not because I have an opinion. We're also at this liminal space, so that's what Liminal Works is trying to get at, where we are at the precipice of being able to build technologies that are decentralized and safe because of Web3. The decentralized web network they do great work up in San Francisco, really promoting the technologies that are available there. But one of the things around decentralized networks is your ability to create, much like in the original web, so it's almost like a 3-back-to-1, decentralized networks and informal networks. And so if we can adopt these type of technologies amongst the trusted networks that we have, our friends, and maybe bring in people who are on the margins into those networks, they would have a safe space to create and to share and to communicate. But yeah, now more than ever, it's easy to build a website, to build things. It's like incredible what AI can do. And so it's actually a really great opportunity right now to throw yourself into it and to not be scared, because you can build things really fast. One of the things that a lot of larger organizations, and this has nothing to do with STEAM in particular, but when we think about big tech, is that they need you to fit a certain mold. And they want you to really identify with your work so that you spend a lot of time on it. And what's important to realize is that you are so much more than your work, and to realize that from a young age, and to give yourself that balance in your life so that you don't have the expectations showing up to work that you're going to be acknowledged in all of your greatness in all your varied ways. You also, by being queer, becomes a differentiator. So if it brings a specific style or energy, even if it's just like dance, right? You love to dance, or just the way you think, if you can really think outside of the box in inclusive ways, those are ways to differentiate yourself from other people on the team. And that actually helps the business and it helps the product that you're building. So to remember to speak up and continue to speak up for when you know that you feel like you have something to add, because you'll differentiate yourself. If there's anything I've learned from being a part of or being under large entities or organizations that are oppressive in many ways, is that you can't tell them what's wrong about them and expect them to change. It's not how it works. But what I've been able to do is change things by modeling a different way of thinking, a different way of being. And when they see, oh, something cool is going on there, why are people so excited about that? They will naturally start appropriating or trying to mimic or learn about how you're doing that. Through most cultures and histories, we've been the leaders of innovation. I think it's only in this moment that we aren't in America and in the West. And so I think that queer people should realize that who they are gives them this huge advantage to see things from multiple perspectives that should be not just involved, but should be leading the work. And so if something or somebody tells you otherwise, they just don't know their history. And they're only looking, at this last 50 years of capitalism. I also think it's important for them to be involved, for us to be involved because of representation, of course. I think that we'll make better things for the world that way. And then also I think that we can bring a lot of joy to the work. I am in a place in my career where I can really lead with authenticity. And I see the way that it inspires my teams and it inspires my colleagues and sometimes even inspires leadership to show up in different ways, to show up in authentic ways. And so that's led me to run workshops for the organization. I've done like a workshop on Ballroom for a few organizations. And I really like to challenge the cultural norms of the workplace. I actually can show in some places that it's okay to talk about sex. And actually sex is something we should be able to talk about, but it's about building the right framework so that people feel safe talking about those things, even in the workplace. And so, yeah, I think that we can really think outside the box because that's what we do. So yeah, we deserve to be here. My favorite is definitely S6-E because I got to work with some of the most badass individuals I know. And we got to have a lot of really in-depth and hard conversations. And I got to organize events for these stakeholders and customers that, who doesn't like throwing a party for your friends, right? I think S6-E aside, because it's what I believe in so much, I would say the global burden of disease. So what I loved about the global burden of disease was that nothing like this had been done before. It felt like we were building a rocket to space. The global burden of disease is the Human Genome Project for global health. It had over, I believe, 1,000 contributors from all over the world. So we were able to work with, donkey bite specialists to scrotum snake bite specialists in India, to all these different types of people who were so hyperfixated on one thing, and build a platform that was inclusive of all these global health problems. And it gave us a framework to be able to start measuring and building research around them comprehensively. So in the global burden of disease, what we ended up with was a list of causes of death and mortality and morbidity, things that can ail you, that was mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And then we pulled data from all over the world, all different types, from survey to vital statistics to police reports, and then build instruments to make these as standardized as possible. And so there was breaking edge work in the statistical fields that we did on that. And you end up with this really complete portrait of what ails and kills people around the world by subregion, by specific age, by sex. That is just incredibly detailed. And once we built this, which took 6 years, it changed the world. And so we were able to go in and advise ministries of health about how they should completely change their health system, because they weren't seeing that what their burden was 20 years ago, their burden of disease, is like doesn't account for even a quarter of what the burden of disease is now. And so it was a way to empower systems change to be relevant to the historical facts on the ground. It was a way to build a comprehensive system, which is what we are planning to do with SESI once we start to include other movements in the system. It exposed me to all these different areas of knowledge that you don't think would be related, like taxonomy. Taxonomy in library science is like incredibly important if you're building systems and frameworks that all need to be able to relate to each other. Global disease, burden of disease is something where I can continue to go back to, look at what they're doing now, and be inspired. So they have a great tool on the website, and you can see all this type of information about the world. And there's so many hidden insights in there, especially for people who love to research how culture impacts health. The data is all there. And so you can figure out whether they're related or not. I think I'm most proud of surviving. I know what brings me down. I figure out who brings you down is always really easy, right? But what brings you down, what cycles you might be caught in, what environmental factors hold you down that you may be able to escape from, and finding ways to escape them or to build new worlds. And so I'm just proud to have survived. I've gone through many, I think 3 major depressions in my life. And now it's like leveled out because I've done so much work. So I think I'm really just proud of the self-work I've done. And it would be impossible without my communities. And so finding and building your cultural community, your queer community, people that are in love with the same interests, music, dance, styles, expression, people to really, reverberate with and shake the walls together, wakes you up to the power that you have as an individual. And I would never want to die knowing the power that I have now. My career goal is to change the world. My leadership style is very much through advocacy and through empathy. And so I'm the type of leader that likes to sit back, really try to understand in the big picture what's going wrong here or what's going right, and to try to build systems and frameworks or to put the right music on in the room that will get everyone, including myself, going in the right direction. And so I think that Liminal Works is one way where we're going to bridge this gap where there's nobody serving us yet. There's no product nonprofits out there other than Wikipedia Foundation. So we need to build more things like Wikipedia Foundation. We need to have more nonprofit product-centered technologies. And just see where that leads me. Every decade has been very different than the last, so I have no idea what is in store for me. But I do love teaching, and I have guest lectured a few times, and I would love the opportunity, once I have the knowledge, to be able to share a lot with communities in person. My goal in life is for people to feel safe in my presence, whatever that means. It gets so much better, like so much better. My life is way better than I could have imagined. And that's accepting the negative with the positive. My intuition is right, and to not stop listening to it. Have a growth mindset. And even if you are very introverted, to make, if only a selective effort, to connect with other people. And you can find a lot of people just like you, even if you're introverted. I come off as extroverted to many people. I am not. It's only because I've selected the people in my life that I feel safe with. So I'm actually energized by the time I leave the house or when I'm out here with you, and ready to connect even more. I honestly, truly believe I don't have all the answers. And I think that I've had the privilege to be able to take big risks. And thank God some of them paid off. I think I would have kind of been fucked if they didn't. But I know that not everyone is in the place to I feel like it's trite to say take big risks, but not everyone honestly is in a place to take big risks. Persistence is really key. We think of persistence almost like discipline. If you don't have good discipline, then that's bad. But the framework that I love, especially in light of loving yourself, is that showing up for yourself consistently is an act of love. And if you aren't dedicated to something because you don't love it, or it doesn't help you love yourself or bring you closer to yourself, then it's probably not something worth being persistent to try to do. but it was like my first job out of college. It was an internship. I just kept emailing the guy over and over and over. And then he just gave me an internship because I could stop bugging him, but he knew I could do the job. And build mentors. I think nothing has helped me more, especially not getting a master's degree, not getting a PhD, than building relationships with mentors. In college, that was with the professors that were guest professors that were brilliant, and they had office hours, and many of those office hours are sitting there alone. That's an opportunity. In the workplace, you may have somebody, and you will meet people in the workplace that you look up to. You'll be surprised how often they'll be excited to be able to meet somebody like you. They give you the little cheat codes in life. I wouldn't call them like, formulas to success, but many of them have pointed me in directions that it would have taken me years to figure out on my own. And I think by that just compounding over so much time, and I'm always seeking new mentors, I've been able to grow so much more than I would have if I didn't. And then lastly, that every failure is a win. There are truly very few failures that are worth punishing. Most failures we can get something out of, we can learn from. Even if that learning is just that we need to pivot, having received that learning through a failure is a gift. And so to not lament on those little failures so much and take that as an opportunity to grow and move and pivot and just move on. There are very few people that think that way, and being sort of mid-career as I am, I've noticed all the people who are really successful, they think that exact same way. They're always looking for wins within failures and things that they can take away from that.